Hello viewers, welcome to the business law session, B.B.A 5th semester. In our previous class, we had discussed about the valid elements of the contract like the offer, acceptance, competency of the parties, consideration. These we have discussed here. These are the most essential for here a contract to be called as a valid contract. Valid contract means which is enforceable in the court of law. Now, but this is not only the essentials that makes here the contract valid. There are other aspects also. When in the first class we had studied defined contract and state the essentials. There we had mentioned one more here element, the essential of the valid contract as free consent. The consent of the parties in a contract must be free. So before we go to this here the element, we will try to understand, we will try to know here what you mean by the term consent. So consent means what? So the consent is here what is mainly known in the contract, what can be termed as a consent. So here what we find, when here both the parties agree upon the same thing at the same time, here we say that both the parties have consented. So what is consent? So but this is not an essential, so we are adding the prefix there free, but first we have to understand what is the meaning of that consent. Then only we can proceed further. So what mainly the law says here, when both the parties to the contract agree upon the same thing at the same time, here the parties are said to have consented to each other. This is what here the law says. Now just take one example. I will give you one example for this. A makes an offer to B to sell his car for 3 lakhs. A has made an offer to B to sell his car for 3 lakhs. B has accepted the offer and he has sent the acceptance that he is ready to purchase the car for the price quoted. Now what we say here, both the parties have agreed on the same thing. A wanted to sell his car and B has agreed to purchase that same car. Both have agreed on the same thing. At the same time, both when offer and acceptance is there, both they have agreed at the same time over the same thing. So what we say that here the contract is established. The consent of the parties is there. Both the parties have given the consent. Consent is nothing but what we can say, the willingness to do. The willingness of the person is expressed either through offer or through the acceptance. So that is what you mean by the consent. Now on the same thing, both the parties must agree with the same thing. Now for example, take the example which we have studied such examples earlier. A is having 2 cars, one is red and one is blue, and he intends to sell a red car and makes the proposal for B that he is ready to sell his car for 3 lakhs. B agrees to purchase the car keeping in the mind to purchase the blue car. A wanted to sell the red car but B wanted to purchase the blue car. Now both the parties have not met on the same thing. The identity of the minds is not there. Both the parties have not consented on the same thing. So we say that there is no consent. No consent has taken place. Because what the law requires that they must consent on the same thing. Both the parties must here mainly consent here at the same thing. On the same thing at the same time. Then only it is possible. So in the first example I gave you that he wanted to sell his car here to B for 3 lakhs because there was only one car. That is a very thing is very clear that here and B wanted to purchase that car. It is a good example there. Both the parties have here agreed on the same thing at the same time. But here I gave you that A was having 2 cars. He wanted to sell red, but B wanted to purchase blue. So identity of the minds have not taken place in this second example. The consent has been not obtained of the parties. Hence, you cannot say that both the parties have consented. They have not agreed on the same thing. They have not agreed on the same thing. That's why here that thing must be understood. Consent means both the parties to the contract must here agree on the same thing at the same time. This is here the thing. First you have to understand what you mean by the term consent. But look at the jurists. They do not say only consent, because consent can be obtained in many ways. That is why the law or the jurist, how they have framed the words, here they have given a prefix word, free consent. So previously we had seen one mainly element called consideration. Consideration is not sufficient. It should be, I had mentioned it as lawful consideration. Lawful consideration. So also you will be studying the next element, object. Object must be legal object. Likewise here the consent must be free consent. So these two parties must have agreed here voluntary on here the subject matter on the same thing at the same time. So there here mainly the consent must be free. Now what you mean by the term free consent? Consent means you know what is consent. Now what do you mean by this term free consent? This has to be explained. So in Indian Contract Act, here we have this mainly the explanation of the free consent. Nowhere we have that definition as such. This is what we have the explanation here for the free consent, which is one of the element or the essential for the valid contract. A consent is said to be free when it is not caused by. So the consent is said to be free. So first thing that there must be free consent. When you say that the consent is free, when it is not caused. This is important for us. It is not caused. Not caused by coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation or mistake. The consent should not have been obtained by using any one of these methods. Then if any one of the method is used, it said the consent is vitiated. The consent is violated. The consent becomes unfree consent. If any of the methods have been used here to obtain the consent, then it is an unfree consent. So it is not a free consent. What the law requires is free consent. So what we have here, coercion. So coercion means force. Coercion means applying the force. So forcibly you take the consent of another person, then what we say that the consent is not free. If the consent is obtained here by applying the force, so the force may be directly applied on the party or it may be indirectly applied. So that is what I will explain you later by taking examples, and one decided case you have got here, Ranganayakama versus Alwar Seth. That's a very famous case we have got in this coercion case. So this I will be discussing later. But try to understand what you mean by just coercion. Coercion means force, applying the force. You have seen in many of the movies or anything, here maybe one person holds a pistol to another and asks him to sign his property deed. That is what he is applying, that force, the coercion, threat of the life. The person is giving here mainly the threat to the life. So out of fear he mainly signs the agreement. It means that here his consent is obtained by coercion, by force. You have applied a force. What is the force? That is a threat to his life. Fearing that he has signed the deed. That is obtained by force. So what we say here, the consent is not free here because it has been obtained by coercion. C-O-E-R-C-I-O-N. Coercion. Coercion means force. Undue influence. If you obtain the consent by using the undue influence also, it is here not a free consent. You cannot call it as a free consent. Undue influence means here in contract, one of the party will be in dominating position. One of the party will be in a dominating position. And taking the advantage of that here the position, he tries to here again make an unfair advantage from the other. He wants to gain unfair advantage. He uses his influence for undue purpose. He misuses his power. He misuses his position. Here this is what we call it as undue influence. Undue influence. He is taking here the mainly what a position he is holding there, he is taking that position for here and misusing it to gain unfair advantage. So that we use the word undue influence. But what is most important, one person must be in dominating position. So such examples we will be noting it later. So when I give you this mainly the description, this is here what we have here. They will ask you a question in your examination. Define consent and state here when the consent is said to be free. When the consent is said to be free. So you have to explain this. Here the consent should not be obtained by any of these methods. Here then it will be a free consent. So we have to give the details. Each one you are going to take examples. Wherever there are decided cases also we have to study and then we have to proceed. Now, usually what we find here, and just one example I will be giving you. Principal of a college and a part-time teacher. Usually, principal tries to exploit here the part-time lecturer or the part-time teacher. The undue influence, the poor chap, he particularly agrees for everything or he gives his consent to save his job there. In the same way, here a police and a person on a trial. By applying the force, what we call it as in police language, we call it as the third degree method. Third degree method is used there. And they try to get here mainly the consent of that person. Even though that person who has not done the guilt or the offense, because of the torture of the police, he has to agree, okay, I have done it. This is what happens there. So that is undue influence is being used here. The third one is the fraud. Fraud is to deceive. If you deceive the person and take the consent, then it is not a free consent. So it is called as the fraud. Even remember, in a contract, concealment of a material fact is also a fraud. If you conceal any of the material fact, if you are knowing it, but you are not bringing it to the notice of the other part, concealment of that. You are aware of the fact, but you have not revealed it to the other party who is entering into the contract. Then the concealment of the fact here, if it is material to the contract, then here it is said that you have obtained the consent by fraud. Purposely you wanted to enter in the contract, so you have concealed that and you have obtained the consent. So it is a fraud. Misrepresentation. So misrepresentation almost resembles fraud, but we cannot say it is a fraud because the person who is making the representation there, he believes that what he is saying is truth, but in reality it is here false. Here later it becomes false there. It doesn't mean that he did not, the honest intention was there, he did not have the intention to deceive the party there. But in fraud we are seeing the person had the intention to deceive the party. But here the honest intention is that, but the representation is wrong. For For that, here even in such circumstances, what we say, the consent is here not free. That is what we call it as misrepresentation. And consent obtained by mistake. This is also the last fact. Here one, and we will be discussing. There is a unilateral mistake and bilateral mistake. We have to discuss that. So whether unilateral mistake is excusable or a bilateral mistake is here excusable, or is mistake excusable or not, yeah, that we have to consider. So after studying this, then you have to mention what is the effect of such contracts made where the consent is not free. So if the consent is not free, then if it is obtained by coercion, undue influence, fraud and misrepresentation, the contract becomes voidable in nature. Remember this. The contract becomes voidable in nature. When we had discussed the types of contract, we had studied that what is a void contract and what is a voidable contract. Void contract is not enforceable in the court of law, but voidable contract is enforceable in the court of law at the option of one party. So whose consent has been obtained by any one of these methods, that person has got the right here mainly to enforce it in the court of law or to rescind the contract. It is at the option of the party. So voidable contract means it is here valid contract, it can be enforced but at the option of one party, not the another party. Whose consent has been obtained by any one of these methods, he has got the right. It is at his option, it can be enforced. Otherwise, he can rescind it. That is here an alternative for that. So it becomes voidable. But when it is a mistake, that here the mistake is, you have to see whether it is unilateral mistake or bilateral mistake. Usually, here it does not become voidable, it leads to void contract. It becomes void, not enforceable. So that we are going to discuss later here in the conclusion when we finish all these here elements which vitiates the consent. Vitiate means which here violates the consent, which makes the consent from free to unfree if these methods have been used. So just keep this here the introduction for your topic, that is a free consent. From your examination point of view, you are having this for 10 marks question. 10 marks question will be there. The question, as I told you, define consent and state when the consent is said to be free. When the consent is said to be free, when it is not caused by any of these methods, the consent is free. Suppose if it is caused by these methods, the consent is not free, then you have to give the explanation. The explanation has to be given. It's a 10 marks question, remember. And wherever it is possible, try to give the examples. The examples will carry more weightage in your examination. So we have discussed today what is consent, what is free consent, and when the consent is said to be free, when it is not caused by any one of these methods. Now with the next class, we will be continuing with the discussion of these elements, coercion, undue influence and others, what they mean and what is the examples for these. We will try to understand it in the next class. We will continue that. Thank you.